NC upon a time, in a faraway land nestled between two great mountains, there was a beautiful village called Aravand. The people of Aravand were kind and hard-working. Farmers sang while they ploughed their fields. Children laughed as they chased fireflies at night. And in the evenings, grandmothers told wonderful stories beside warm fires while the stars sparkled like diamonds above. But 3 years ago, something terrible happened. The rain stopped coming. At first, the people were not worried. "It will rain next week," the farmer said, peering at the pale sky. But next week came and went. Then a month passed. Then a whole season. And still, not a single cloud appeared. Not a single drop of water fell from the heavens above. The rivers shrank. First they became shallow streams, then muddy trickles, and finally, nothing at all. The great river Suvan, which had once roared and sparkled through the heart of the valley, was now a cracked, dusty channel lined with sad grey stones. Children who had once played in its cool waters now only stared at it, puzzled and frightened. The fields turned yellow, then brown, then grey. The wheat withered before it could grow. Apple trees dropped their blossoms without making a single fruit. Cows grew thin, their ribs showing beneath their dull coats. Even the flowers in the village square, the ones old grandmother Nara had planted 50 years ago, curled up their petals and quietly died. Older man Elder Barris said, "I have lived in this valley for 80 years. I have seen floods and I have seen storms. But never, never, have I seen the sky forget us like this." The youngest children of Aravand had never seen rain at all. They had heard stories about it, about water falling from the sky like a million tiny silver coins, making everything smell fresh and green and alive. But they had never felt it on their skin, never heard it drumming on a rooftop, never splashed through a puddle in their boots. One of these children was a girl named Zara. She was 9 years old, with bright curious eyes the color of dark honey, and hair that always managed to escape from its braids. Zara was the kind of girl who asked questions nobody else thought to ask, and who believed in things nobody else dared to believe. Every evening, Zara climbed to the top of the old stone wall at the edge of the village and stared at the sky. She stared so hard and so long that her eyes watered, though whether from staring or from sadness, not even she could say. Crescent Moon Zara whispered to the stars each night, "Someone must be able to bring the rain back. Someone brave and powerful. Where are you? We need you so very much." And then one night, when the moon was a thin silver crescent and the air was hot and still and dusty, Zara saw something remarkable. Far, far away in the direction of the Forbidden Mountains, the tall, dark peaks that no villager had ever dared to climb, she saw a glow. A deep, warm, orange glow, like a tiny ember burning in the darkness. And she thought she heard, carried on the dry desert wind, the faintest sound she had ever heard. A sound like distant thunder, but softer. Like music, but wilder. Like breathing, but enormous. Zara's heart leapt. She jumped down from the wall, her mind made up before her feet even touched the ground. Sparkles, the adventure was about to begin, whether the village of Aravand was ready for it or not. Sparkles. Next morning, before the sun had even properly risen, while it was still just a smear of orange on the horizon and the air was slightly less hot than usual, Zara packed a small bag. She put in a piece of flatbread, a handful of dried figs, her water flask, sadly not very full, and her grandmother's old silver compass, which always pointed true north. Then she pulled on her boots, tightened her braids, and slipped out of the village before anyone else was awake. She was going to the Forbidden Mountains. She was going to find the source of that mysterious glow. And she was absolutely not going to let fear stop her. The walk was harder than she expected. The land between the village and the mountains was a wasteland of cracked earth and dry, scrubby bushes that scratched her legs and seemed to lean away from her as if warning her to turn back. The sun rose higher and hotter with every hour. By mid-morning, sweat was dripping off her nose and her water flask was already half empty. Lizard, a small lizard on a rock, watched her pass and said, "Foolish child. Nobody goes to the Forbidden Mountains. Turn around while you still can." Cactus, a tall, twisted cactus, groaned in the dry wind. "The mountains are full of danger. There is a great creature that lives up there. Go home, little one." But Zara kept walking. She thought about the dry river. She thought about the thin cows. She thought about little Rummy, her 5-year-old neighbor, who had cried last week because there was no water to give his pet tortoise a bath. That thought alone was enough to keep her feet moving. By afternoon, she had reached the foothills. The rocks here were black and jagged, like broken teeth jutting up from the earth. Strange orange and purple mosses grew in the crevices, somehow alive in the dryness. High above, the mountain peaks stabbed into the pale, cloudless sky like dark swords. And then Zara heard it again, that sound. Closer now. It was definitely breathing. Enormous, slow, rhythmic breathing, like the world itself taking a nap. And with it came a warmth that was different from the sun's harsh heat. This warmth was gentle. Almost kind. She climbed higher. The path was steep and the rocks were loose, and twice she nearly slipped. But at last, panting and sweaty and with a small cut on her palm from catching herself on a sharp edge, she hauled herself up onto a wide, flat ledge, and she stopped dead. There before her was a cave. Not a small, dark, scary cave. This was vast. Its entrance was taller than any building in Aravand, and around its edges grew the most extraordinary plants Zara had ever seen. Ferns and flowers in deep purples and blues, impossibly green moss, and delicate little fungi that glowed a soft white. All of this growing here, on a dry mountainside, watered by nothing, in the middle of a 3-year drought. And from deep inside the cave came the glow. Warm and orange. Pulsing gently, like a heartbeat. Speech balloon Zara whispered to herself, her voice barely a breath. Hello. Is anyone there? For a long moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. Then, very slowly, 2 enormous golden eyes opened in the darkness of the cave. Each eye was as big as a cartwheel, bright as sunlight through amber glass, and they were looking directly at Zara. Ara did not run. She had always been told she was brave, but in that moment she discovered that bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to stay even when your knees are trembling and your heart is hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. Her knees were trembling. Her heart was hammering. But she stayed. Slowly, slowly, the creature emerged from the cave. It was the most magnificent thing Zara had ever seen, or ever could have imagined. It was a dragon. An enormous, ancient dragon with scales the color of deep crimson and the sheen of polished copper. Each scale was as big as a dinner plate, and they overlapped one another in perfect patterns, like tiles on a palace floor. His wings, folded against his sides, were veined with gold, and when a ray of sunlight caught them, they gleamed like stained glass windows in a great cathedral. He had 4 powerful legs with curved claws of dark amber, and his tail, long and graceful, curled behind him like a question mark. But his eyes were the most remarkable thing of all. They were the color of liquid gold, warm and deep and full of what could only be described as sadness. The dragon spoke. His voice was like thunder heard from very far away, deep and rolling, but surprisingly gentle. You are a child. A small, brave, foolish child. Why have you come to the Forbidden Mountains? Girl Zara lifted her chin. My name is Zara. I come from the village of Aravand. And I have come because my people are dying of thirst. Our land is dry. Our rivers are empty. I heard that something powerful lives in these mountains. And I hoped that something might be able to help us. The dragon regarded her for a long, silent moment. Then he settled down onto his haunches, his enormous head coming to rest just a few feet from Zara, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his scales. Dragon Ember said softly, My name is Ember. And yes, I know about the drought. I have watched it from these mountains with great sorrow. For I am a rain dragon, child. Making rain is what I was born to do. Girl, then why? Zara began. Dragon Ember sighed, and the air around him shimmered with heat. Because I cannot. Not anymore. My rain scales, the special scales on my underbelly that hold the water of the sky, were cursed, long ago, by a shadow which was angry that I gave rain to her enemies and not to her. She cast a drying spell on my scales, and ever since, whenever I try to call the rain, the clouds scatter and the water turns to dust before it reaches the ground. I have been trapped here, unable to help, watching the land below dry up, and it breaks my heart. Ember turned his great head away. If a dragon could cry, Zara thought, Ember would be crying now. His golden eyes were bright and wet at their edges, and he blinked slowly, like someone trying to hold something in. Zara sat down on a rock, carefully, because the rock was near the edge of the ledge, and thought hard. A curse. A shadow witch's curse. She chewed her lip and looked at her hands and then looked up at Ember with her honey brown eyes wide and steady. Girl, every curse has a way to be broken, she said. My grandmother told me that. She said no bad spell is permanent. There's always something that can undo it. A truth, or an act, or an object. Do you know what could break yours? Ember's golden eyes glowed a little brighter. Dragon, there is one thing, he said slowly. A single tear, freely given, from a heart that holds no fear. Not collected by force. Not demanded. Freely given, from someone who looks upon me and feels only kindness, and no fear at all. If such a tear could fall upon my rain scales, the curse would shatter. Zara looked at him, this vast, ancient, magnificent creature who had been alone on a mountain for years, aching with the inability to do the one thing he was born to do. And something happened in her chest. Something warm and wide. She was not afraid of Ember. Not even slightly. She felt sorry for him. And she felt, though she could not quite name it, something very much like love. Hen Zara blinked. She realized her eyes were wet. Not with sadness, exactly. With something deeper. A feeling so full and so honest that she had no word for it. And before she even thought about it, a tear had rolled down her cheek and dropped, glittering in the orange light, onto the nearest of Ember's great copper-red scales. For one breathless heartbeat, nothing happened. And then the mountain shook. A sound like cracking ice echoed across the peaks, and a great crack of purple lightning split the sky above them, not from any cloud, but from thin air itself, as if something old and powerful had just been woken up very suddenly and was extremely annoyed about it. The air turned cold. The light changed. The warm glow of Ember's cave dimmed, replaced by a sickly purple grey. And then, with a sound like 1,000 whispers all saying no at once, a figure appeared on the ledge. She was tall, impossibly tall, and dressed in robes the colour of midnight. Her hair was silver white and wild, flying around her head as if blown by a wind that touched nothing else. Her eyes were the colour of amethysts, beautiful and hard and absolutely furious. In one hand she carried a staff topped with a glowing purple crystal that pulsed like a diseased heart. #the Shadow Witch, for it was she, spoke in a voice like glass shattering on stone. So, a child thinks she can break my curse? A tiny, insignificant, powerless little child. Dragon Ember stepped forward, putting himself between Zara and the witch. Merca, this is between you and me. The child is innocent. Leave her. #the witch laughed, and her laugh sounded like a door slamming on something wonderful. Oh, but it's too late for that, Dragon. The child's tear has begun to crack my spell. I felt it. So now I must offer her my own terms. A test. 3 questions. If she answers truly, the curse lifts. If she fails, the drought remains forever, and your dragon stays on this mountain for another 1,000 years. Girl Zara stepped out from behind Ember's wing, her voice steady though her hands were not. What are your 3 questions, witch? The Shadow Witch smiled. It was not a nice smile. #first question. She said, pointing a bony finger at Zara. What is more powerful than a sword? Zara thought of the River Suvan, how it had shaped the valley over thousands of years, carving through solid rock with nothing but patience and persistence. She thought of the stories her grandmother told, how words had stopped wars, how songs had healed heartbreak. Girl, kindness, Zara said firmly. And time. And love. All 3 beat any sword. The witches I twitched. 2nd question. What does a brave heart fear? This was a trick question, Zara knew. People might say that a brave heart fears nothing. But that wasn't right. She thought of Ember, sitting alone on his mountain, afraid of not being able to help the people who needed him. Girl, a brave heart fears failure, Zara answered. Not for itself, but for the people it loves. It fears letting them down. That's what makes it brave. It acts anyway, even with that fear. The witch went very still. The purple crystal on her staff flickered. #final question, Merca hissed, leaning down until her cold eyes were level with Zara's warm ones. What do you feel for this dragon, who has just met you today, and has given you nothing, and might give you nothing, and who is a creature of fire and power and who could crush you in an instant? What do you truly, honestly feel for him? Zara looked at Ember. His golden eyes looked back at her. And Zara said, without hesitating for even 1 second, Girl, I feel sorry for his loneliness, she said. I admire his goodness. I trust his kindness. And I like him very much. That is what I feel. The shadow witch screamed. It was a sound like a thunderclap and a sob combined, and then she simply dissolved into purple smoke, and was gone. The moment the shadow witch vanished, Ember let out a sound unlike anything Zara had ever heard. A deep, reverberating cry of pure joy that rolled across the mountains like music from the biggest instrument in the world. And then something wonderful began to happen to his scales. They began to shimmer. First the copper-red scales darkened to a rich, deep blue-green, the color of deep ocean water. Then they began to glisten, not with firelight, but with actual moisture. Droplets formed on each scale, catching the light, running together, dripping from his flanks and belly in tiny rivulets that pattered onto the dry mountain rock and made small, perfect puddles. After 3 years of drought, the sight of those puddles made Zara want to laugh and cry at the same time. Dragon Ember looked down at himself in wonder, and then at Zara, with eyes now the color of a bright summer sky. I can feel the water of the sky again. It's been so long. Oh, Zara, it's been so very, very long. Girl, then let's not wait 1 second more. She said, grinning so wide her face could barely contain it. Take me with you. Fly over my village. Let them see you. Let them feel the rain. Dragon Ember lowered his great head to the ground. Climb on, little one. Hold tight to the scale ridge behind my neck. And do not let go, because I intend to fly higher than I have flown in many years. Zara scrambled up. The scales under her hands and knees were warm and smooth and solid as carved wood. She found a ridge of raised scales behind Ember's neck, perfect for holding, and gripped them with both hands. Then Ember spread his magnificent wings, and with one enormous powerful beat, they were airborne. Zara had never flown before. In the first second, she nearly screamed. In the second second, she was laughing. By the third second, she was in love with the sky entirely. Below her, the cracked landscape of the drought spread out like a brown patchwork quilt. She could see the white glitter of the dry riverbed, the grey patches of dead fields, the small cluster of pale stone buildings that was Aravand. She could see how desperately, terribly dry it all was, and then she looked up, and she saw what Ember was doing. He was calling the clouds. He beat his wings in slow, magnificent arcs, and with each beat, the moisture on his scales lifted into the air as vapor. The vapor rose and spread and cooled. And as it cooled, it met more moisture, drawn from somewhere ancient and deep, from underground rivers and hidden springs and the memory of water in the rocks themselves. The sky above them began to darken, not with the hot, brassy darkness of drought, but with the deep, rich, beloved blue-grey of real rain clouds. The people of Aravand noticed. Of course they noticed. They had been watching the sky every single day for 3 years, checking, hoping, praying. First one child looked up. Then a farmer. Then old Elder Barris, leaning on his stick in the village square, tilted his wrinkled face upward and gasped. And then the first drop fell. It hit the cracked earth with a soft pat that somehow, in the perfect silence of that suspended moment, everyone in the village heard. Then another drop. Then 5. Then 20. Then the sky opened its heart and rain came down in sheets, in curtains, in a joyful rushing torrent that drummed on rooftops and splashed in the dust and turned the cracked earth into soft, grateful mud. Rain cloud hashed the village erupted. People ran out of their houses with their arms spread wide, their faces turned up, laughing and crying and spinning in circles. Grandmothers wept. Children shrieked with delight. Young Rummy, the 5-year-old with the tortoise, stood perfectly still in the middle of the square with his eyes shut and his mouth open, tasting the rain for the very first time in his short life. Above it all, Ember circled and soared and called the clouds, and the rain fell harder and cleaner and colder and more beautifully than anyone could remember. The river Suvan began to murmur, then to trickle, then to rush, then to roar. The land was remembering how to be alive again. And so was Ember. When the rain finally eased to a gentle drizzle and then to a soft, misty shimmer, Ember landed at the edge of the village. He came down quietly, folding his great wings and settling onto the wet earth with the careful grace of something very large trying to be polite. The villagers, who had been dancing in the rain, stopped and stared. Some took a step backward. A few of the smaller children hid behind their parents' legs. But Zara slid down from his back and landed in the mud with a splat that made several people laugh, and she turned to face her neighbors with the widest, muddiest, happiest grin they had ever seen on her face. "Girl, everyone," she announced loudly. "This is Ember. He is a rain dragon. He has been living in the Forbidden Mountains for years, unable to help us because of a terrible curse. He is the reason it is raining right now. And he is my friend." Another silence. Then old Elder Barris hobbled forward through the crowd, leaning on his stick, his white eyebrows raised so high they nearly disappeared into his hair. He stopped in front of Ember and looked up, a very long way up, into those great golden eyes. For a long moment, the old man and the ancient dragon regarded each other. Then Elder Barris bowed. A deep, slow, formal bow, the kind you give to kings and heroes. "Older man, welcome to Aravant, Ember," he said. "Our village owes you a debt beyond measuring. But more than that, you are welcome here. Not as a legend. Not as a monster. As a friend and a neighbor. As one of us." Something happened to Ember then that Zara would never forget. The dragon, this vast, ancient, fire-breathing creature who had faced down the shadow which without flinching, ducked his great head, and his golden eyes went very bright, and he made a small sound, very quiet, like a hum deep in his chest. It was, Zara realized, the sound of happiness arriving somewhere it had been absent for a very, very long time. The celebrations that followed were the greatest Aravand had ever known. Tables were dragged out into the village square, now a glorious river of muddy puddles, and whatever food anyone had was shared. There was music, old drums and flutes and one very enthusiastic grandmother with a tambourine. There was dancing, which mostly involved splashing. There was laughter, so much laughter that it seemed to echo off the mountains for days afterward. Ember sat in the middle of it all, perfectly still, with children climbing on his tail and braiding flowers into the ridged scales along his neck and feeding him pieces of bread. He ate them with grave dignity, even though bread was clearly not his usual diet. Rummy, the 5-year-old with the tortoise, had placed his tortoise on Ember's nose, and both dragon and tortoise were regarding each other with deep interest. Turtle the tortoise, whose name was apparently Gerald, seemed entirely unimpressed by the dragon, which for some reason made Ember laugh, a low, rolling sound like distant thunder, for the first time in years. As the sun set, painting the sky in layers of pink and orange and gold, all reflected in the new puddles and the rising river, Zara sat beside Ember's front foot, which was roughly the size of a large armchair. She leaned against his warm scales and looked up at the sky. "Girl, will you stay?" she asked quietly. "Or will you go back to the mountains?" Dragon Ember considered this carefully, the way he considered everything. "I will not stay here in the village. I am rather too large, and I suspect I would keep sitting on things by accident. But I will not be far. I will come whenever the land needs rain. Every season, I will make my rounds, your valley, and the next, and the one beyond. That is what a rain dragon is for. But I will always come back here first." "Girl, because of the rain?" Zara asked. Dragon Ember looked down at her, and his golden eyes were warm as sunrise. "Because of you, small one. Because you climbed a mountain for your people and cried a tear for a stranger and answered a witch's questions with nothing but honesty. There is not a mountain high enough or a desert wide enough that could keep me away from a friend like that." Zara smiled. She felt, all at once, the tiredness of the long day settle into her bones, the long walk, the steep climb, the shadow witch, the flight, the joyful chaos of the celebrations. She yawned hugely. Ember gently curled his tail around her, like a warm copper wall, sheltering her from the cool night breeze. Above them, a rainbow, the first rainbow Aravand had seen in 3 years, arched across the darkening sky, impossibly vivid, its colors reflected in every puddle and pool and rivulet that now sparkled across the valley floor. And in the morning, when the village woke, everything was different. The grass had begun to push green shoots through the softened earth. The apple trees were already budding. The river Suvan ran clear and cold and sang over its stones as if it had never been away. And high above, circling on great copper-red wings against a sky full of real, beautiful, grey-white clouds, Ember made his patient, joyful rounds, bringing rain to every dry and thirsty corner of the land. He kept his promise. Every season, without fail, he came. And every time he approached Aravand, he would dip his great wings, just once, in greeting. And every time he did, Zara, who always seemed to know exactly when to look up, would wave back from wherever she was, the rooftop, the riverbank, the top of the old stone wall where she had first seen his glow all those months ago. And the land was green, and the rivers ran full, and the children of Aravand grew up knowing what rain smelled like and what a rainbow meant and what it felt like to have a friend who was ancient and enormous and breathed fire and flew on copper wings, and who loved them in his quiet, steady, dragon way, just as they love him. And they all, Every last one of them, even Gerald the tortoise, lived and flourished and grew for a very, very long and happy time. Tilda the End Tilda. A tale of courage, kindness, and a dragon who remembered his purpose. The moral of the story. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing kindness and action even when you are afraid. One small, brave act of genuine love can break the oldest and darkest of curses. And sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is simply a single, honest tear given freely from an open heart.